17 pregnancies, 17 funerals, and a queen who outlived every single child she ever carried. Most historians will tell you this was tragedy, but the medical record tells you something far more disturbing. It tells you Queen Anne's own body was the executioner. An invisible disease was strangling her children from the inside, one by one, before they ever drew a single breath. And by the time she died, her body was so destroyed, so utterly consumed from within, that she didn't fit in a standard coffin. They built her a square one. Stay with me, because what happened inside that womb is one of the most shocking forensic stories the British Crown never wanted you to understand. 17 is not a number, it's a sentence. 17 times Queen Anne of Great Britain was pregnant. 17 times the Crown prepared for an heir. And 17 times death arrived before life ever could. 5 of those children were born alive. Only one survived past infancy, William, Duke of Gloucester, who died at 11 years old from what physicians of the era called a violent fever. The other 12 never made it out of the womb. 12 miscarriages, 2 stillbirths, 3 infant deaths, all before Anne turned 45. Now pause on that for a moment. This was not the 1300s. This was not an era of total medical ignorance. Anne's pregnancies spanned from 1684 to 1700, a period when European medicine was actively evolving, when dissections were being performed, when the Royal Society of London was publishing scientific observations. And yet nobody, not a single royal physician, could explain why the Queen's body kept killing her children. The official record describes her losses in the language of grief, a great misfortune, another sad event, God's sovereign will. But grief is not a diagnosis. And what was happening inside Anne's body was not an act of God. It was biology. Specifically, it was her own immune system, running a silent program of destruction that modern medicine would not fully identify until the 1980s. Here's what the court physicians couldn't see. Anne wasn't simply unlucky. She wasn't weak or cursed or spiritually deficient, as some contemporaries quietly suggested. She was immunologically compromised in a way that made successful pregnancy almost biologically impossible. Every time an embryo implanted in her uterine wall, her body launched an attack, not against a foreign invader, but against the pregnancy itself. The placenta, the very organ designed to protect and nourish a developing child, was being destroyed from within. Clots formed in the blood vessels feeding her babies. Oxygen was cut off. Nutrients never arrived. And the children died, not because of anything visible, not because of infection or accident, but because Anne's immune system had decided, silently and ruthlessly, that her own pregnancies were the enemy. The court mourned 17 times, but the enemy was never outside the palace walls. It was inside her blood. And what that enemy was, and exactly how it worked, is where this story gets medically disturbing in ways that will fundamentally change how you think about one of history's most tragic queens. Imagine a security system so corrupted that it attacks the very house it was built to protect. That is precisely what was happening inside Queen Anne's body. And it has a name: antiphospholipid syndrome, APS. It is an autoimmune disorder in which the body produces abnormal antibodies. Proteins that, instead of targeting bacteria or viruses, target phospholipids, the fatty molecules that form the membrane of every cell. When those antibodies attack the blood vessels of the placenta, clots form. Blood flow is blocked. The fetus is starved of oxygen and nutrients, and the pregnancy collapses. Silently, invisibly, with no external wound and no explanation a 17th century physician could ever find. Modern retrospective analyses, including work published in the journal Lupus in 2011 by Dr. Nigel Moore and colleagues, have argued with significant clinical weight that Anne almost certainly suffered from both APS and systemic lupus erythematosus. Lupus, simultaneously. This combination is known today as a catastrophic overlap. Lupus attacks multiple organ systems at once. APS destroys the vascular architecture of pregnancy. Together, they create a body that is constitutionally hostile to carrying life. What makes this forensically significant is the pattern. APS-related pregnancy loss doesn't present randomly. It clusters, it repeats. It accelerates as the antibody load increases with each successive pregnancy, which is exactly what Anne's obstetric record shows. Her losses became more frequent, more devastating, and earlier in gestation as the years progressed. Her body wasn't failing by chance. It was following a clinical trajectory that any modern hematologist would recognize immediately. The physicians surrounding her prescribed rest, tonics, and prayer, none of which stops an autoimmune cascade. But the disease wasn't finished with her, because while it was destroying her pregnancies, it was simultaneously doing something else. Something visible, something grotesque, something that was slowly turning her body into a ruin that shocked even the men who carried her coffin. Before we go further, there's something about the Tudor and Stuart bloodline that puts everything we're discussing in a much darker context. The concealment of royal medical truth didn't begin with Anne. The most disturbing example involves Elizabeth I herself, a queen who refused every examination of her body after death, and whose burial record contains details that serious historians have never been able to fully reconcile. There is a growing body of primary sources, letters, court documents, eyewitness accounts, suggesting the crown may have been hiding something about Elizabeth far more fundamental than illness. We've compiled the full case in the Tudor Enigma. It's not speculation. It's an archive of documents the official narrative has quietly ignored. If Anne's story disturbed you, Elizabeth's will go further. The link is in the description and pinned in the first comment. Now, back to Anne, because what this disease was doing to her body on the outside was just as brutal as what it was doing within. By her late 30s, Queen Anne was barely recognizable as the woman who had ascended the throne. Gout had consumed her joints. Not the mild, manageable gout of popular imagination, but a severe, crippling, inflammatory assault that had spread from her feet to her knees, her hands, her spine. There were periods when she could not stand unassisted. She was carried to her own coronation in a sedan chair. She attended cabinet meetings, unable to move her legs. The pain was documented by her physician, Dr. John Arbuthnot, as near constant and of an extraordinary violence. But gout was only part of it. Her skin broke down into open ulcers. Her legs swelled to a size that contemporary accounts described as almost unrecognizable. The same autoimmune activity destroying her pregnancies was attacking her connective tissue, her joints, her vascular system, simultaneously, relentlessly, without pause. She was 49 years old when she died. She looked by multiple witness accounts like a woman of advanced old age, swollen, immobile, her body so damaged internally that when physicians prepared her remains, they encountered something that had never happened before in the history of British royal burial. Her body did not fit a standard coffin. And what they did next is the detail that no official royal biography has ever been comfortable explaining. When Queen Anne died on August 1st, 1714, the men tasked with preparing her body for burial faced a problem that had no precedent in the royal household. Her body had expanded, not simply through weight gain, but through years of inflammatory fluid accumulation, organ enlargement, and tissue breakdown driven by her autoimmune disease. The dropsy alone, what we now identify as severe edema, the pathological retention of fluid in the body's tissues, had distorted her physical dimensions to an extraordinary degree. Her abdomen, her limbs, her torso, all grossly enlarged, hardened in places, deteriorated in others. No standard coffin could contain her. The solution was documented in contemporaneous accounts and later referenced by historian and royal biographer Dr. Edward Gregg in his definitive 1980 study of Anne's reign. A lead-lined coffin, almost square in its proportions, was commissioned specifically to accommodate the dimensions of her body. It was an unprecedented construction, and a quietly devastating footnote to a life already defined by physical suffering. The same body that had failed to carry 17 pregnancies to term had also failed systemically and completely from the inside out. This was not a queen undone by politics, by war, or by betrayal. She was undone by her own biology, by a disease that modern medicine can now treat, but that in her era had no name, no diagnosis, and no mercy. The square coffin wasn't just a logistical solution. It was the final, undeniable proof that something had been catastrophically wrong from the very beginning. Here is what 3 centuries of medical advancement allows us to say with clinical confidence. Queen Anne was treatable. Today, a patient presenting with recurrent pregnancy loss, joint inflammation, skin ulceration, and progressive edema would be tested immediately for antiphospholipid syndrome and lupus. The standard protocol, low-dose aspirin, anticoagulant therapy with heparin, careful immunological monitoring, gives modern APS patients a successful pregnancy rate of over 70%. 70%. Against Anne's 0. Every single one of those 17 deaths was, in the language of modern medicine, potentially preventable. But what is equally significant is what the crown chose not to acknowledge. Then, and in the centuries since, the official royal narrative surrounding Anne has consistently framed her losses as personal tragedy, as divine will, as the unfortunate biological reality of a woman in a difficult era. What it has never done is submit her remains to modern forensic analysis. Her body lies in Westminster Abbey. No DNA extraction, no isotopic analysis, no formal retrospective autoimmune screening of her preserved tissue, despite the fact that such technology now exists and has been applied to far older royal remains across Europe. The question is not whether the science could confirm what the medical record already strongly suggests. It almost certainly could. The question is why it hasn't been done. Some historical mysteries survive not because the evidence is gone, but because no one with authority has chosen to look. Queen Anne did not lose 17 pregnancies because she was weak or cursed or simply unlucky in an age of primitive medicine. She lost them because her immune system was fundamentally biologically hostile to pregnancy, a condition that had a name, a mechanism, and a treatment that arrived 270 years too late. Her gout, her ulcers, her inability to walk, her monstrous swelling, and ultimately that square lead coffin. None of it was random. It was all the same disease moving through her body like a slow fire, destroying everything it touched. 17 funerals, 1 square coffin, and a medical truth that the palace records buried just as quietly as the children themselves. The womb was a graveyard, but the bones of the Stuart line still hold secrets the crown refuses to scan. For the unredacted files, visit the TUDOR Enigma in the link below.